Okay, let's open up a 700-year-old case file on history's most beautiful and, honestly, most poisonous stone. Today, in this explainer, we aren't just looking at the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond glittering safely in the British crown. Oh no, we are tracking a terrifying historical pattern. Step by step, we're going to trace the path of this single diamond to see if the centuries of absolute bloodshed surrounding it are mere coincidence or, well, something far darker.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the sparkling yet heavily misunderstood history of the Koh-i-Noor diamond. Look, we all know the name, and we've probably all heard the dazzling, larger-than-life tales of its past. I mean, for centuries, this single gem has captivated empires and inspired countless legends. But the story we've been told, it's actually packed with elaborate myths. So today, we're going to use rigorous historical and gemological research to pull back the curtain. We'll figure out exactly where this incredible diamond came from, how it got its incredibly unique shape, and what really happened to it as it bounced from treasury to treasury over the centuries.
Now, what's incredibly fascinating is that the brutal rules for this historical pattern were actually laid out centuries ago. Listen to this translation from a 1306 AD Sanskrit text. It says, "He who owns this diamond will own the world, but will also know all its misfortunes. Only God or a woman can wear it with impunity." I mean, wow. It's a literal explicit warning. Whoever claims this gem is going to get immense power, but also invite total ruin. And keep that specific loophole in mind. Only God or a woman can wear it safely, because it perfectly and quite terrifyingly predicts the fate of every single king who dared to claim it after.
So, we begin at the origin. Before it ever sat in fancy velvet boxes, this stone was known as the Siamantakamani. And it didn't just magically appear in a palace somewhere. It was literally clawed out of the mud in the Kollur mines in Andhra Pradesh by the bleeding hands of enslaved workers. From the very second it was unearthed, it was completely surrounded by human suffering. And when it eventually made its way to the Kakatiya Dynasty, well, our dark timeline officially kicks off.
Almost the moment the Kakatiya dynasty claimed it, swift, brutal destruction followed. In 1323, their incredibly strong kingdom was just completely overrun, ending with King Prataparudra committing suicide as his empire essentially burned to the ground around him. Then the diamond passes to the 𝐂𝐿𝐺 dynasty. And guess what? Brothers literally start slaughtering each other. Next, it moves to the Tughlaq dynasty in the mid-1300s, and they meet the exact same fate of treason and collapse. It's like a virus. Wherever this stone went, the throne room just turned into an absolute bloodbath.
The mythology of this diamond usually kicks off with a single dramatic exclamation, Koh-i-Noor.
Fast forward to 1739, and the ruthless Persian conqueror Nadir Shah completely sacks Delhi. Now, the desperate Mughal ruler at the time secretly hid the diamond inside his turban, but Nadir Shah found out. And in a stroke of absolute evil genius, Nadir Shah proposes they do a friendship exchange of turbans, pretending it's an ancient custom. I mean, the Mughal king is cornered. He couldn't refuse without immediately starting a war right then and there. So they swap. Unrolling the turban in private later, the blinding gem tumbles out. Nadir Shah supposedly yelled Koh-i-Noor, which means Mountain of Light. It finally had its famous name, but Nadir Shah had also just directly inherited its doom.
It's an incredibly dramatic story, isn't it? You've got betrayal, cunning, and a fabulous treasure falling literally right into the victor's lap. It completely captured the 19th century British imagination and pretty much became the universally accepted origin story. But did this dramatic naming actually happen? Well, historical records meticulously analyzed by modern researchers point us in a totally different direction. None of the Persian sources from Nadir Shah's actual time ever mentioned this sneaky turban exchange. Instead, the whole story seems to have been popularized decades later in India, eventually getting picked up and immortalized by British storytellers. Instead of a clever turban trick, what we actually have is what we can call the Peacock throne alibi. According to Nadir Shah's own chronicler, who was a highly credible eyewitness to the looting and saw the vast treasures with his own eyes, the diamond wasn't tucked away in a royal headdress at all. It was actually already proudly mounted on the head of a magnificent, jewel-encrusted bird that adorned the Mughals' famous Peacock throne. And we're talking about one of the most opulent, awe-inspiring pieces of furniture ever built in the ancient world.
Now, jump forward a bit. When the Mughal Emperor Babur conquered India, this diamond fell right into his hands, and he wrote something absolutely staggering in his diary. He calculated that the sheer monetary value of this single, solitary stone could literally feed the entire human population for 2.5 days. Just let that sink in for a second.
The entire world fed for days off one rock. But here's the thing. Babur seemed to kind of know about the curse. He didn't wear it. He smartly locked it deep down in his treasury, safely out of sight. And because of that, he uniquely managed to die a normal, natural death.
But of course, people forget. Generations later, Emperor Shah Jahan, the guy who built the Taj Mahal, he makes a fatal error. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just an error, it was massive hubris. He pulls the diamond out of the dark and proudly mounts it right at the dead center of his glorious Peacock throne for the whole world to see. And the reaction? It was almost immediate. His own son overthrew him, murdered Shah Jahan's other heirs, and locked the former supreme emperor in a miserable little cell. Shah Jahan spent his final years just weeping, completely stripped of his empire, staring at his own creation, the Taj Mahal, through a tiny prison window.
Right, so this is where the curse dramatically escalates from political ruin into gruesome physical mutilation and pure madness. Tracking the Persian and Afghan empires here is just chilling. The moment Nadir Shah took the Koh-i-Noor, he became so violently paranoid that he actually gouged out his own son's eyes right before his own guards hacked him to pieces in his sleep. His successor, Ahmad Shah Durrani in Afghanistan, died an agonizing death from a flesh-eating disease that literally consumed his face. And the guy after him, Shah Shuja, he was captured and blinded by his enemies using hot needles. The diamond wasn't just toppling empires anymore, it was systematically destroying the physical bodies of the men who held it.
So this completely blinded king, Shah Shuja, somehow manages to escape to Punjab, and he surrenders the blood-soaked diamond to the Lion of Punjab, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Now, Ranjit Singh was a deeply respected, incredibly powerful, and just ruler. And through sheer strength of character and stability, he actually seemingly held the dark energy at bay during his reign. But the thing about this diamond, it's patient. The very moment he drew his last breath, the curse unleashed itself with terrifying speed.
The legendary stability of the Sikh Empire just vanished overnight. Poof. In an impossibly brief 6-year window right after Ranjit Singh's death, 4 different royal successors were wiped out in bizarre, highly suspicious ways. We are talking sudden, mysterious poisonings. We're talking heavy architectural stone roofs mysteriously collapsing out of nowhere to crush royal heirs to death. It was an absolute bloodbath as the diamond seemingly went into overdrive, aggressively clearing the path of all adult male rulers.
And because of that brutal 6-year purge, the throne ultimately fell to a 10-year-old boy named Dulip Singh. Naturally, the British Empire saw a massive opportunity here. They annexed Punjab and directly targeted this child. They separated him from his mother, forced him to convert, and essentially made a child sign the Koh-i-Noor over to Queen Victoria. The tragedy here is heartbreaking. This young boy, who was stripped of absolutely everything, eventually died penniless and completely alone in a cheap hotel room in Paris.
So, what does Koh-i-Noor actually mean, and where did the name come from? Well, translated from Persian, which was the predominant language of the Mughal court at the time, it literally means mountain of light. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this name was already in active use at the Mughal court way before Nadir Shah even showed up. He wasn't naming it in some sudden moment of shock and awe like the legend insists. He was simply claiming a stone that already bore this legendary, highly evocative title. And honestly, looking at a glass replica of the original diamond right next to line drawings of its early faceted shape, you can immediately see why the name makes so much sense. It wasn't just a gasp of poetic inspiration, it was a very literal, physical description of its high-domed, lumpy form. It genuinely looked like a miniature, glowing mountain resting right in the palm of your hand. The artisans who originally worked on it clearly wanted to emphasize its towering presence rather than just making it sparkle. This highly unique shape, with its flat base and a high-domed crown covered in mostly triangular and pentagonal facets, is known today as the High Mughal cut. It's a very specific, historically significant faceting style. Rather than bouncing light in a million fiery directions, this cut gave the stone a really soft, glowing optical effect. It's an entirely different vibe from the sharp, highly reflective, brilliant diamonds we are also used to seeing in modern jewelry cases today. And this distinct shape wasn't just some random stylistic choice. It was actually deeply rooted in a stark contrast between Eastern and Western gem-cutting philosophies. In the Eastern Indian tradition, the absolute highest priority was preserving the physical mass of the stone. Flaws were carefully polished out to maintain spiritual auspiciousness, because flawed gems were thought to bring bad luck, but the core size remained totally untouched. On the flip side, the Western European tradition became completely obsessed with faceting a stone for maximum brilliant symmetry, and they would do this even if it meant grinding away massive, irreplaceable amounts of the precious stone itself. It is absolutely fascinating to map out exactly how Indian cutters treated this specific diamond. If we look closely at the Koh-i-Noor's original flaws, cleavage planes, and cavities, we are looking at a masterclass in preservation. Notice these little notches and grooves marked C and E. Rather than cutting the whole diamond down to a perfectly symmetrical shape and losing all that precious material, Indian artisans carefully carved out localized flaws, or they used these small natural splits to hold the diamond securely in its setting. It was all about working respectfully with the natural stone to preserve its massive size and positive energy. Knowing all about this careful, localized artistry, you kind of have to ask, where did this highly specialized Mughal cut actually originate? You'd probably assume it was an ancient, entirely indigenous practice passed down for millennia on the Indian subcontinent, totally isolated from the rest of the world. But historical evidence tells a different story. It was actually the result of a rich, fascinating cultural collision that ended up reshaping the global gem trade forever. All the evidence points right to the early 1500s. As European table and rose cuts started arriving in India, trade routes were rapidly evolving. Then, in 1510, the Portuguese conquered Goa, and they brought Western goldsmithing and advanced gem-cutting tools with them. By the mid-16th century, the Mughal cut was likely born right there in Goa. These incredibly skilled Gujarati merchants basically adapted the newly introduced European faceting techniques they saw from the Portuguese, but they tailored them entirely to suit ancient Indian aesthetic desires. They wanted maximum weight, and they wanted to mimic the majestic shapes found in nature. These innovative cuts became so deeply integrated into the local culture that Indian gem merchants affectionately referred to the high Mughal style as kanval, or water lily. When you look straight down at those pentagonal facets surrounding the very top of the diamond, they strongly resemble the rectangular, sharply finished petals of a flower. This absolutely wasn't a coincidence. It was a beloved motif that was super common in beautiful 16th century Gujarati decorative art, deeply tying the stone's physical appearance to its cultural home. For centuries, the Koh-i-Noor proudly retained this literal mountain of light form. I mean, it survived the tumultuous rise and violent fall of entire empires, passing through the grand treasuries of the Vijayanagara Empire, the Mughals, the Persians, the Afghans, and eventually the Sikhs. Through centuries of war, peace, and dynastic shifts, it kept its incredible mountainous mass, weighing in at a staggering 190 metric carats of pure glowing history.
Now, here's where things get wild. When the Koh-i-Noor finally arrived in London, the British actually did their historical homework. They read that ancient 1306 Sanskrit warning we talked about earlier, and Queen Victoria realized the absolute, literal danger this posed to future kings. So what do the British do? They do what they do best. They use bureaucracy to fight a blood curse. They drafted a strict legal decree stating that only female monarchs, or the wives of kings, can ever wear the diamond. To this day, a reigning king of England is strictly forbidden from physically touching it.
So they used a legal loophole to protect the physical lives of their kings, right? But did Britain truly escape the curse? Look at the historical timing. Almost as soon as the Koh-i-Noor was firmly embedded into the British crown, the mighty empire on which the sun never sets literally began to set. One by one, their massive global colonies fought for and successfully won independence. It's like, sure, they saved the lives of their kings, but they ultimately lost the world.
But of course, the diamond's journey took a massive turn. When the British eventually confiscated the diamond from the last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire, it was shipped thousands of miles away to London. There, it was displayed as a highly anticipated star attraction at the Great Exhibition of 1851. The public lined up for literally hours just to finally glimpse this fabled, mythical stone from the East. And you know what happened? The Western public was severely underwhelmed. Viewing this deeply spiritual object purely through a rigid Western lens, the public completely missed the cultural and historical significance of the Indian cuts. They basically tore it apart. They called it an irregular egg form and openly mocked the grooves in the sides, declaring the ancient artisanship unskillfully executed. Because their eyes were trained to look for fierce, fiery symmetry, the stone just looked dull to them. A lot of attendees actually complained that it looked like a mere piece of cut crystal because it didn't have that symmetrical brilliance they expected from a royal diamond. This public disappointment was seen as a flat-out national embarrassment for the British. So, to satisfy these Western tastes for modern, symmetrical brilliance, they ordered the ancient, historic stone to be completely recut. They wanted it forcefully transformed from its centuries-old, culturally rich, high mogul form into a standard, modern oval brilliant. They were completely prioritizing a momentary sparkle over centuries of story. The resulting procedure was, frankly, a forensic disaster for the original stone. By forcing this beautiful, irregular, natural mountain into a perfectly symmetrical oval, the cutting process shaved off a staggering 43% of the diamond's mass. Take a second to process that. Almost half of this legendary gem, material that had been revered by emperors for generations, was essentially turned to dust on a cutting wheel in London. Comparing the original high Mughal cut to the new oval brilliant, the tragedy becomes so visually obvious. While the diamonds certainly gained that expected Western-style sparkle and fire, the recut totally destroyed the magnificent, towering mountainous dome. It literally lost the exact shape that gave the Koh-i-Noor its evocative name in the very first place. Symmetrically brilliant or not, it was no longer a mountain.
When we zoom all the way out and map the entire 700 years together, the data points to a pattern that is honestly hard to ignore. The Mughals under Shah Jahan, imprisoned. The Persian and Afghan rulers, mutilated and diseased. The Sikh heirs, 4 wiped out in a blink. And finally, the vast British Empire itself, dismantled. This isn't just a string of bad luck. It is a rigorous 700-year consistency. It kind of proves that the 1306 warning wasn't just some dramatic ancient poetry. It was a highly accurate historical forecast.
So, as millions of tourists walk past the Koh-i-Noor in the Tower of London today, admiring it simply as a beautiful piece of jewelry, you really have to wonder. Beneath its shine lies the invisible blood of thousands and the absolute ruin of arrogant men who thought they could master it. Sure, science and history can easily explain away individual events. But when you look at 700 uninterrupted years where every single male owner is systematically destroyed, I mean, is it really just a coincidence? Or is there a darker, undeniable force to this mountain of light that we simply refuse to understand? Think about that next time you see it glittering behind the glass. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.